Good afternoon and welcome to Right Now with Chris Reddy on 95.3 FM, 1400 AM WILI. We are recording at our usual time slot of 3 o'clock on Thursdays, but we are actually broadcasting right in between the Red Sox-Phillies preseason game and the UConn-New Hampshire hockey game for men's UConn hockey coming up after our broadcast here. We have a shortened segment. This episode is only going to be one segment. I am by myself in studio. This is Chris Reddy. I also have with me producer Matt. I will include him a little bit towards the end of our segment here in one of our discussions. Today's topics are going to reflect some things that have happened this week with stories that I've talked about a little bit before regarding issues in local and state legislative politics. One of the things that I kind of have joked about in a couple of different episodes was Chris's crystal ball and kind of things that I foresee happening. And I have a feeling that a couple of those are going to come up today. One of them I'm actually going to be following up on and we're going to talk about right now. And this is something that occurred about a month ago. And if you do want to go back and listen to any of these previous episodes, you can go to WILI.com, go to podcast, scroll down to Right Now, and select one of our previous episodes. You can also look on YouTube, search WILI and Right Now, and you can actually watch the in-studio recording that we are conducting here of these episodes of Right Now. One of the episodes that I talked about, the concern that I had with nonprofits in Connecticut and some of the nonprofit fundings. Absolutely, there are nonprofits that do fantastic work in Connecticut. There's no doubt about that. However, we have a process in Connecticut in the state legislature where some nonprofits are selected to receive funds through earmarks from politicians, and this questions some transparency. This questions a proper vetting policy to evaluate these nonprofits. It also doesn't account for a follow-up review to see if these nonprofits are actually utilizing taxpayer funds in the manner that they expressed at the onset and when they were granted this money. That came up again with these emergency certifications that started at the beginning of the 2026 legislative session. And one of the things that did happen this week was that Governor Lamont used a line item veto to strike funding for a number of these, and it related specifically, from what I'm reading, to something that I reported on about a month ago, and it was the fact that there are legislators that are now being investigated by the Department of Justice and the FBI for questionable accounting practices and things that have shown up on audits done by independent non-state entities. These line item vetoes I agree with, in that we need to look at these things in a better manner. We need to be more careful about how this money is being dispensed and who it's being dispersed to. In another episode, I previously talked on how some of these nonprofits are pass-throughs, where money goes to one nonprofit. That nonprofit then disperses this to secondary nonprofit organizations and non-governmental organizations. And as soon as you get to that second and third step, there is no longer the specific accountability that needs to be in place for us to see what is happening with this money. So that was always a concern of mine. I'm glad to see that this is happening. My concern is I always want to see what's happening below this, because we've had one party that's been in charge for decades. This is something that has happened, and we've been told at different times this is small ball, this is nothing to be seen. This is the regular way that government operations work. I'm concerned that this now is simply tidying up because it's an election year, and that's what I'm starting to see in this. So we're going to keep an eye on this. This is something that I'm going to keep track of, but this is something that has happened in the past week where there was line item veto striking the funding to some of these nonprofits that I had highlighted in previous episodes there. What this directly ties to is a second topic that I'm going to cover. I spoke about this a little bit in the same session that I talked about the nonprofits and some of these earmarks that we've noted in state budgets in the past few cycles. And this specifically has to do with I'll say something that occurred on Tuesday. And this was that a lawsuit was filed in the state Supreme Court. This was on the behalf of a professor at the Connecticut State Naugatuck Valley College, so part of the Connecticut State Community College and University systems that was recently reformed by the state legislature just a couple of years ago. He's a professor there, a former, from what I read in his online bio, is a former Stanford Police Department officer. He's also an attorney. And he is currently filing a lawsuit against several Connecticut unions to disclose money that is being spent on political activities. From what I understand in this, and what I've been reading about this, and I will obviously be following this in closer detail, it's been not even 2 days since this really was publicly known and aware to the public and available to the public to look at this. But I will explain to you a few things that I've been able to identify here. First is that this court case is being filed against really 3 unions named in Connecticut, but there's going to be implications to other unions, and I'll explain that in just 1 second. The 3 are the SEIU Local 1973. This is the Congress of Connecticut Community Colleges, which apparently the Professor Ormond, who works for the state Naugatuck Valley College in Connecticut, is a part of. This is also known as the 4 Cs. The second union is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. This is AFSCME, Local 391, and then also the Connecticut State Prison Employees, Local 391. Now, one of the big unions in Connecticut that is not named in this, but is absolutely going to have to be included in this, is the Connecticut AFL-CIO, because they represent members from these other unions. What this professor is looking for, because he did not agree with emails that were sent out on behalf of union membership to participate in certain functions politically oriented that he did not agree with. And what is concerning is that these unions, and according to Connecticut General Statute, any union that has 25 or more members is supposed to file an annual report with the Department of Labor. That hasn't happened. That hasn't happened for years, many years, in fact. And what the State Department of Labor says is that the fine, which for not filing this particular annual report, is along the orders of like $50 or $75. They're like, it makes no sense for us to go after these unions for such a small fine, so we're not even going to follow up on this. What the unions are saying is that this information is publicly available on IRS 1099 forms. It is, but it says the amount that's being distributed, not who it's going to, in what amounts, and not in that specificity that I feel taxpayers in Connecticut should be able to see. In a different previous episode of Right Now, I highlighted how the NEA, which is one of the largest national educator association, that's its name, National Educators Association, the National Education Association union, we highlighted how since 1990, this organization has contributed $2 in political contributions for every $1 that it has represented its membership. I am not anti-union as long as the union is doing what it is supposed to be doing, and I see that as being negotiating wages, negotiating benefits, negotiating health benefits, negotiating worker conditions, even being a mediator in grievances. for employees. All very acceptable things for unions to do. What I don't like is when they are taking so much of your money and then rolling it right back into political campaigns that support their endeavors through political action committees. And that's what I see happening, and I see it happening greatly in Connecticut. And that's a concern of mine. This started, and I highlighted this in, again, another episode that you can listen to in one of our podcast formats or on YouTube, how this really was initiated by Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California. What happened back in the late 60s was that he saw the need, and he provided legislation in California for county employees that were firefighters and sheriffs and police officers to unionize to negotiate wages. Subsequently, the next governor came into California and created legislation that furthered that to now all state employees. Our state employees in Connecticut do a great job. But there is absolutely no doubt that state pension debt is one of the things that drives up many of the costs in Connecticut, and it's something that we have to look at towards our future. It is going to become a financial issue because at some point we're not going to have the money to continue feeding this debt. So it's something we have to look at, but that goes beyond what I'm trying to get to in today's shortened segment here that we're going to have on this episode. What I'm trying to say is that in this particular lawsuit, the complainant is not seeking financial damages. He's not claiming that there's financial damages to him as being a member of this union. What he's looking for is transparency and to see where political contributions are going to and to who. And I think that is something that's very important. One of the things that a lot of people don't see when we list these things that Connecticut is at the top of, we commonly hear people say, "Oh, we have the highest property among the highest property taxes in the country, among the highest electrical bills in the country, among the highest cost of living, fuel costs, all this stuff." One of the other things that we are absolutely number one in the country is state employee compensation. As I've said before, our state employees do a great job. But as we start to look at how we need to get the affordability issues in Connecticut under control, we have a wave of Connecticut state employees that will be retiring within the next 10 years. We need to see how there are duplicate programs that we can streamline and we can make a more efficient state government where we can start to trim off some of this bureaucracy so that we can relieve ourselves from some of this unpaid pension debt that is being held over our taxpayers for decades upon decades. We're going to move on to another topic that I want to cover during this shortened segment of our Right Now episode for Thursday, March 5th. This was something that was brought up 2 weeks ago when I had a special guest on, our state representative, Ann Dauphinais, from just east of where I'm broadcasting from in Willimantic right now. She sits on the education committee, and we talked about a state legislative policy that is being brought up this session that dealt with homeschooling. Another thing that came out on Tuesday, and I listened to this live on the CTN network, was that the State Department of Education commissioner was commenting and providing testimony in person for this legislative bill, and it's Senate Bill 6. If you want to look this up, I'll be talking about this again in just a couple of minutes before we end our segment today. And how you can look these bills up and track them and follow them. But the commissioner from the State Board of, the Connecticut State Department of Education, the commissioner, made a statement during her testimony, and this relates to one of the parts of Senate Bill 6 that's currently being debated in the state legislature right now, is what happens when a student is withdrawn from public schools in the state of Connecticut and particularly in the spotlight for the past year has been homeschooling as that option. Traditionally, the state of Connecticut does have very lax policies and laws on homeschooling. My concern of what's happening here is that in light of some recent very dramatic and difficult stories for the public to digest in Connecticut, between a young man who's an adult now that was pretty much held captive for almost 2 decades in Waterbury and was kind of lost in that homeschooling system by DCF, and then also a case in New Britain that I talked about in an episode several months ago. The state is looking for accountability and to be able to track and monitor students that are removed into a homeschooling situation. And I've had a chance to read some of this. I've not been able to read every bit of this legislature yet. There's just so much that's going on this legislative cycle that even for me, who's somebody who does this for hours every single day, it's difficult to track all of this and to keep track of everything, especially when it's spread across many different committees. One thing that happened this week was this commissioner said that the State Department of Education cannot comply with notifying DCF regarding a student withdrawal from public school. What she cited was a federal act that's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, F-E-R-P-A. And what it says is the State Department of Education cannot disclose personal and private student information without the parent's permission. It can only be done in the case of larger population evaluation of districts of schools, of state evaluation of school performance, or for research purposes. It cannot be utilized for individual case management, and I agree with that. I think that the state legislature is going to try and bypass this, citing these 2 recent cases and welfare of children. My concern there is that when you are now mandating that a local school district contacts the State Department of Education, who then contacts DCF, who is specifically looking to assess risk to children and families, and you're putting families who are looking for relief for a number of reasons that I can think of. What if you had a bad case of bullying to your child in a school district and you want that child out of there? You want them out of there right away. You withdraw them, and all of a sudden, because you were concerned about bullying in this circumstance, you are an automatic referral to DCF. There are a number of concerns that I see here, and the citing that the State Department of Education is saying is that federal funding will be withheld because of any type of infringement on this FERPA Act. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. What I don't want to have happen is that there is a lack of due process or even a presumption of guilt over families that simply want to have a better environment for their children to learn in. We have about 5 minutes left in our segment here. I'm going to cover one more thing here. As promised, I'm going to bring Matt into this one. And this is one that I was looking at this morning, and as I was starting to really think about what was going on with this bill, because there's some things that I do agree with in this part, and we're going to talk about this for just a couple minutes to finish up our segment here. This is Senate Bill 319. One portion of this specifically, and I kind of joked about this last year, there's a look to ban gas-powered backpack leaf blowers. They're going to start by banning the sale in 2029. They're going to ban the use of gas-powered backpack leaf blowers for 2030. But what I want to point out is that before all that, this legislation is going to mandate that state departments and contractors that work on state property be mandated to switch over from gas-powered backpack leaf blowers to the battery-powered electric options in 2027. Right around the corner. How are they going to fund this?
Right.
You're not going to believe it. Where do you think we slide hidden taxes in these days, but in our electric bills under the public benefits?
Oh, man.
Can you believe that they are going to, through the public benefit funding, have a loan program through the Green Bank in the state of Connecticut where these state contractors and state departments, I'm looking at it specifically towards the state contractors, can take out loans so that they can fund switching from a gas-powered backpack blower to an electric backpack blower for 2027.
Wow.
There's a little bit components, but I just want to very quickly try and give you a sales pitch on a backpack blower that is electric, because a friend of mine owns a steel dealership. I'm a steel guy. I have a big backpack blower that is gas powered because I live in the woods. I am surrounded by trees.
Right.
I have a chainsaw that I use to cut wood because I heat my home supplementally with wood throughout the winter. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these costs that are involved here. My backpack blower is like 6 years old. It cost me about $800. I've had 2 services on it in 6 years. I put in gas mixed with the oil, the premix.
Right.
It runs. It runs great. It gets my job done. I put it away. I'm fortunate that I don't have neighbors right on top of me, so I can imagine that in my case where I could be blowing leaves for a couple of hours, people would be upset. But here's the cost analysis, and this is what I'm really concerned about. The best comparable model, mine was $800 a few years ago, now $1,069. So with taxes, will you agree that's $1,100 in Connecticut?
Yeah, definitely.
That's the unit only. No batteries.
Yep.
Okay. You have an option for 2 different batteries.
Of course.
A 300 to 500 series battery. The 500 series battery, $482 for one battery.
Wow.
So we'll say $500.
Yeah,
okay. This backpack blower takes 2 of them. So now your unit that is basically a big paperweight for $1,100 requires 2 batteries. That's another $1,000.
Yep.
Okay. Now you need a charger. I'll give you a charger for $200, but it charges 1 battery at a time.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
Now we have Steel's 4-port multi-charger for $400, so you can charge 4 batteries at once. Once you get home with your now $2,500 worth of backpack blower, 2 batteries, a 4-port charger at $2,500, those 2 batteries, can you guess how long you have to blow leaves on high?
Let's say maybe 3 hours.
17 to 18 minutes.
What?
Not even joking.
Wow.
I'm not even kidding.
Wow. Okay.
Now think about the guy at Eastern or Yukon, or the woman who works for the landscaping services there.
Yeah.
Who has to blow leaves for 10 hours a day.
Oh, man.
Where are you going to charge as a contractor? Where are you going to pull up in your pickup truck with your landscape trailer and charge the batteries you need to run for an hour? We're running out of time today, but I'm going to dive into this a little bit more detail because there's a whole lot more to this story.
Yeah.
This is going to cost us a fortune under this public benefits charge. We're coming up to the end of our segment. Thank you very much for listening to this Thursday, March 5th episode of Right Now. I'm Chris Reddy. Enjoy the UConn New Hampshire men's hockey game.